development sectors. As a seasoned facilitator, Monique is often found teaching workshops around equity, diversity, and inclusion. Her down to earth nature often accomplishes her mission to make people feel welcome and included in the spaces they belong. So, thank you, Monique, for willing to be our moderator today. I'll hand
Thank,
it over to you.
thank you so much, Melody. And it's great to see you again. It's really great to see you. Thank you everyone for having me today, and I'm really excited to be here. One, because again, I get to see some familiar faces, which is wonderful, and then I get to know some not so familiar faces, which is amazing as well. So I'm excited to be here regardless, to have a career conversation that is specifically tailored to equity deserving communities or groups. And when I use this term equity deserving groups, I'm referring to groups um, that hold communities who were historically and who are currently underserved and underrepresented. These groups include women, persons with disabilities, racialized persons, persons from diverse gender identities, and persons who identify as 2S LGBTQ+. I want to take some time right now to introduce our amazing panel. Firstly, I want to introduce Dr. Spencer, who is an educator of policy, equity, wellness, and social justice. She completed her graduate studies at the University of Toronto and holds a master's in social work and a PhD in equity studies and education. Dr. Elaine's work involves building excellence and empowering leaders to promote educational and professional success for all. Dr. Elaine is also the executive producer of Kaleo Productions, a production company that promotes inspirational forms of entertainment through media, stage plays, and film. She founded the initiative Mental Health is the Church's Business, which is an education awareness program and film documentary that provides a faith-based perspective to addressing mental health in Black communities. Dr. Elaine is an international playwright and author of the popular book, Private Pain in Public Pews. Her plays have traveled to 5 countries serving the Afro-Caribbean community and beyond since 2010. Her brand new stage play about teens in high school, OMG, premieres April 7th, 2023 in North York. You can keep up with her work at kaleoproduction.com. Welcome, Dr. Spencer. It's great to have you. The next panelist is Mark Solomon, who is the Senior Advisor to the President on Reconciliation and Inclusion. His work includes collaborating with stakeholders across Seneca to advance the institution's progress on equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives, as well as being responsible for First Peoples at Seneca, the new EDI office, and continues to serve as chair of the EDI committee. A member of the Henvey Inlet First Nation, Mark is the first Indigenous president to lead the Canadian Association of College and University Student Services, and was the first Indigenous governor to serve on Seneca's board when he was elected by his peers as the administrative representative for 2 consecutive terms. After earning 2 undergraduate degrees from Laurentian University in music and Native Studies, he graduated from Brock University with a master's in arts, social justice, and equity studies, and then later York University with a master's in education with a specialization in urban, Aboriginal, and post-secondary studies. Welcome, Mark. You like to do things in twos, I see. Yes, 2 undergraduates, 2 masters. I love it. Jake Farr is a registered clinical social worker in Ontario, holding a master's degree in social work, with an emphasis on addictions and 2S LGBTQI health. Prior to becoming a full-time clinical social worker, he was a business executive, which gives him insight and allows him to understand the nuances of executive stress and burnout associated with today's expectations in the workforce. Jake is a professor with Centennial College in the Addictions and Mental Health Department and an advocate for equitable treatment and care for the 2S LGBTQI community, locally, provincially, and federally. He has a specific interest in trans healthcare. Welcome, Jake. Great to have you all today, and I'm looking forward to learning a little bit more. We've kind of shared your bios, all your accomplishments, which is really great, but I want to get a little bit personal, if that's okay with you. Would you take a moment just to tell us about yourself and what mental well-being means to you on a personal note? And Dr. Spencer, if I can start with you, what does mental well-being mean to you?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Monique. It's such a pleasure to be here just to share because mental health is such a huge, huge area of advocacy for me personally for the last 4 years or so, but even more intensely now because of the post-pandemic that we're in right now. Mental health for me means about the importance of centering ourselves and remembering that we matter. Because I think oftentimes we are so driven, right, towards our career, gets our education, and then the job, and then our professions. And then sometimes we lose ourselves in the midst of that. And I think this is really about the awareness of, as we're graduating from universities and colleges and what have you, is that you always center yourself, put yourself first, and always have those kind of check-ins about your wellness, that gauge. And I guess we'll get into this a little bit more, but who are you outside of your diploma and your
Mm-hmm.
and things like that? I'll elaborate on that a little bit more after my other colleagues get to chime in.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. Centering ourselves. I think that's something that's been I've learned more and more about on a personal note in relation to even like how I move throughout my career. Like, and those questions are so great in terms of like just beginning to unpack who I really am, right? And
Yeah,
then how all these extra things are just like the external factors that add to really who you are. So thank you for
exactly.
sharing that. Thank you. Mark, how about you? Tell us a little bit about yourself and what does mental well-being mean to you?
Sure. There's a tradition in the Anishinaabe tradition called Mino Puwatsuwin, which is walking the good path. Um, and I don't always walk that path. And sometimes either need to correct myself or be corrected by the community. And those are sometimes of being able to get back onto a path. And I think I like that concept of it being a path, that it's always a journey. There's always a way to move forward. Sometimes you have to stop and rest on that path, and other times you move. Sometimes you find yourself off that path. And for anybody who's kind of walked on paths, I would assume that there is a sometimes a relaxed feeling when you find the path again, and that is also it's just a really great analogy that I've that thinking about today in the questions has me centered.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I love that. Walking the path. I really like that. And I guess knowing and understanding that this thing is a journey, right? I think it allows us to give grace to ourselves first, right? So that others can even give us grace. So I appreciate that. What about you, Jake? Tell us a little bit about yourself and what does mental well-being mean to you?
Yeah, great. So just I mean, echoing what my two other peers have reflected on. I think that's a big thing is just to remember that life is a journey, and that we every day we wake up we can learn something new. And I think for me, when I think about mental health, and people will talk about, oh, you got to do self care, which we can talk about later. But I think it's about learning how to um, balance your life. So if you're finding that work is taking over, if you're finding, that you're not finding time to do the things that you love, or you can't even figure out what it is you love anymore, I think that's when we have to do some self-reflection at that point in time. And maybe kind of like what Mark was saying is that's where we take a step, we take a rest and be like, okay, where are we? What am I doing? What is important to me? And I think for me, it's a balance between work, life, fun, and finding what is good. So when you wake up in the morning, you don't wake up already stressed, and we're having a day that we can be like, okay, so whatever brings us, we can deal with. So that for me is kind of that.
I love that. And if you could continue to kind of unpack that, that'd be great. Because you kind of started us in this journey on self-care. You pointed there's a smooth transition. So if you can kind of continue in that train of thought, how are you able to identify changes in your mental health and state? And I think even just asking how kind of assumed that you're able to. So I think let's start with, are you able to identify changes in your mental health and state? And then how are you able to, as well as recognizing the importance of self-care and the role that it plays in relation to building career resiliency?
Oh, yeah. So for me, self care is like this huge topic of conversation that we teach in education, we talk about in the workplace. I think we talk about it with our friends, but generally we are terrible at it in general. Some people are very, very good at it, but also we also look like self care is a will be, well, you got to meditate or you have to do something or whatever. And I think sometimes it's just not doing anything. It's like it's okay not to be busy all the time. And I think we are in such a world that is like, if you're not busy, people think that you're not succeeding, that you're not moving forward. And we have forgotten that it's okay to go to a job, do a great job, and then come home, and that's your home time. That whatever that home looks like for you, whatever your friends look like, and then go back. And I think the biggest thing around for me around self care is around the boundaries, to learn what the boundaries are, to especially in these days where I see people like they come home and then they're on their phone 8, 9 o'clock at night because, well, if I don't answer my emails tonight, I got, well, we have to learn how to reset those boundaries, I think, within the systems that we work and be like, no, I'm going to come to work, I'm going to do a great job, and when I go home, don't call me because I'm not answering. And so I think the self care really comes around understanding, learning to understand boundaries and setting them up early in your career. And when I mean that, when you enter your career phase, you go, you do your job, and you do a good job, but you also make the parameters around, you're not going to call me at 8 o'clock at night. And I'm not going to answer. You can call, but I ain't answering until tomorrow, right? So I think self care really comes around understanding what your boundaries are and learning how to do that, right? And resiliency comes over time. I mean, we grow into that, and which I think we'll talk a little later. But I think it's around, we all don't know what we know until we know it. And I think probably for some of us who are a little bit more older, it's taken time to realize that it's okay to say no.
Yeah. No is
Mhm.
not a bad word.
Absolutely. 100%. It's a very good word sometimes.
It's a good word.
Mhm.
Absolutely. I'm still learning this. No is not a bad word, Monique. I love how you touched on the importance of us reconceptualizing this idea of self-care. Like, what is self-care for me, which is going to be different for you. So I love how you touched on that, and the importance of boundaries. It really kind of begs the question, audience members, I want you to think about this. It really kind of begs the question, how are you preserving yourself, right, for what's next, for what you're going to do tomorrow or what you're called to do long term? Like, how are you preserving yourself? What have you implemented into your schedule, into your life? What have you embedded in, right? So I think it really calls for this, which you're touching on, this reconceptualization of self-care. Thank you for that. Mark, do you want to piggyback on that? How are you able to identify changes in your mental health or state? Are you? I forgot to mention that. And how that connects to self-care and the impact on building career resiliency.
Yeah, for me, I can personally tell when it's going to be uh, a day I'm anxious, I haven't slept, or I have slept. Sometimes it's about how I'm relying upon either substances or people to kind of get through things, and whether that's coffee or that could be food for me. There's all these kind of tells that I know, and of course, it's usually about halfway through and I'm feeling bad, right? And then I know that I'm in a place of, okay, I need to figure this out. And it's taken me a really long time to come to grips with that. That was ways that I navigated the world, and I assumed that that's just how it was. And it took me a long time to understand this isn't great, and I needed to make some significant choices, or else my health and others would reflect. And I'm not great at self-care. I don't think I'm great. I think I'm somebody who, I'm really privileged to work at Seneca, where we have a healthcare plan. I'm really reluctant to call my free employee assistance program to get some help. I'm you know I oh, I'll just go for a walk and it'll be fine. I really for some reason I'm really resistant to it, and it's something that I'm trying to exercise the muscle and normalize as a part of who I am. I do know that when I'm not at my mental fitness or my awareness, it's just like being completely exhausted going into work. I'm not creative enough, I'm not eloquent. I'm finding myself not being prepped and ready to go. And finding that it also strains my work relationships and my other relationships. So I know for the betterment of myself and how I lead and who I am, it is something that I need to do. And yeah, that's how I see it. Not in a great way, but a way that I'm constantly trying to learn and get better at.
No, I appreciate your transparency. No, thank you for sharing that. And I actually wanted to go a little bit deeper in your business by asking you. You said you find that you're a little bit resistant to maybe using some of the resources, and then thank you for like naming some of those resources that are available. Why do you find that you're a little bit resistant to using those resources? And I'm only asking because I
Yeah,
find that's a common theme,
yeah,
right, in
yeah.
a lot of our communities.
And quite honestly, I don't know why. Like it's probably obviously something that I personally need to unpack, but I do feel like it's going to be better tomorrow. It's going to be better this afternoon. It's going
Mm.
to be, and it never is until, and the interesting thing is the minute I do it, I feel so much better, right? The minute I do it, I feel so much better. It's where I am, and it's everything from simple, um, early in the pandemic, I had a bit of some significant anxiety, and they got me to download an app, and
Mm.
like the app was the best thing in the world, and it was just this like breathing exercises and write this out and write that out, and I was like, oh. See, like I could do this on my own too, right? So there are these wonderful tools, and it's the asking and getting help. Sometimes the help helps, and for some reason even as we're talking, I'm feeling resistant to talk about this, but it is something that like there is something, and I think we kind of need to normalize it a bit. And
Yeah.
it's taking me a while to get there, and I'm still not there, but I would like to be there and be better.
You said it best, right? It's a journey, it's a path, right? And we're walking the path. So thank you for that. Thank you for letting me probe you a little bit more. I think what you said is right. I think the normalization of self-care and it being well embedded into our lives. I know for myself, I grew up and I didn't see my parents taking a pause. That wasn't normal for me, right? So I think it's really important. And I'm so grateful that we're living in a time where, younger people, students, they're talking about taking a pause. They're talking about self-care. This is on the tip of their. I didn't even know what the terminology was when I was younger, and so the normalization of it is really important. I think for really, people and students from equity deserving communities to really embrace and embed it into their lives. Dr. Spencer, how are you able to identify changes in your mental health and state, and connecting that to self-care and its impact on building career resiliency?
When I was thinking about this question, I was just kind of like reflecting on the last 12 months and where I was 30 years ago. Because to Mark's point, and my background's Jamaican, like what you're saying, Monique, like what? Stop? What?
Mm.
That boom, 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 go, 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 go. Work, 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 work. Go to school, go to school, go to school, right? And then in 2020, the height, if you remember all the racial tensions that were going on, and many persons like myself were kind of feeling really invested in educating the community, make sure everyone's okay, all our equity policies and stuff like that. And then it was a different level of go, go, go
Mm-hmm.
based on your lived experience.
Mm-hmm.
Deeper I got into that and realized that when I felt that a lot of companies were doing some kind of pejorative work, you know what I mean? Let's show the world that we so-called are. And then when you assessed it, you realize that the needle hadn't turned. And I became very disillusioned about that. And I realized that I was able to identify personal burnout, where I had to make very conscious decisions around not overextending myself in exercises of it's going nowhere, right? I had to kind of make those, and what I call prioritizing areas that bring me joy. And that's what I call it. I'm prioritizing areas that bring me joy. Because for me, joy and happiness are two different things. Joy goes deeper for me. It's at a conscious spiritual level where I'm able to look outside of the work I do and say, wow, I just love that song. I'm going to sing it all day at work. Or I just love doing my shows and writing, and it has nothing to do with my academia, nothing to do with my day-to-day equity work, right? Or pouring into a younger person because I just feel so full after. Because when we work and don't feel fulfilled, sometimes that's where the care, because we're trying to push, and then we get depleted, right? And so, and that's what I started to notice increase. I became a little bit more negative, and I realized, I'm off, I'm feeling off, because I'm normally someone that's about empowerment and just trying to notice those cues. Wow, I'm really ordering a lot of DoorDash lately.
Yes.
I need to cook my favorite chicken, rice and stuff like that. I'm being honest. Those were little cues. Those were, why am I ordering out so much? Because I think I was feeding my emotion, right? And don't talk about COVID weight, right? Anyone, I don't know if you think that's a big thing, right? A lot of people gain weight during the pandemic. And so, yeah, the joy for me is so much of a priority, and just kind of tuning into myself about joy is important in the work, no matter what we're doing. And to me, that could be hobbies, right? Things that you shelved. You remember during the last couple of years, people started knitting or crocheting, or remember the baking thing? Remember everyone was baking? Because the world stilled and people realized, let's go back to things that we didn't have time to do before. And how that made us feel. It really kind of increases and enhances our state of being, our wellness, how we're feeling. And so those are just some of the things, Monique, that I, in the last 12 months, have really been reflecting on. And because I'm in middle age now, I have teenagers who are like not really needing me as much anymore. And so that's a whole nother thing, this feeling of the shift in parenting, because they're exercise, so there's a lot going on. And I think that in this segment, I just want to really kind of emphasize on the joy of life. What brings you that? And sometimes it's not around your career. Sometimes it could be, but sometimes it's not. But meshing those together, I think it makes us, our wellness and our mental health, and then being able to identify when we're kind of going off. Because, like Mark, when you were saying about that resistance, I realized that I'm guilty too, because I've had a semester where I've had the heaviest workload. I'm doing so much. And then I decided to do a play on top of that. Like, that's not wellness. Right? I was just realizing the other day, like, that's just too much. So I'm just loving this conversation.
Thank you for sharing that. Great questions. What brings you joy and what makes you feel full? I think something that I've been paying attention to more physically is my body, just my emotions. I typically I don't tap into, to be quite honest. I'm terrible that way, but I'm starting to pay attention to how I feel. Why do I feel this way in this environment? Why do I feel this way at this point in the calendar? Right? And I think that paying attention to how we feel, especially at certain points, will help us out in our planning, especially as we are transitioning. And I think you kind of touched on this, Dr. Spencer. You mentioned that your kids are grown, which is amazing. Your kids are grown; they don't need you as much, and they're transitioning, right? Which means you're transitioning. So as we transition, I'm talking about post-secondary students, as we transition, especially as members from, equity deserving communities, what would you say is one barrier that you've experienced navigating the post-secondary to career transition? And what piece of advice do you have for equity deserving students when they enter a new workplace? Let's start with you, Mark.
was really hoping you were going to start with somebody else.
I
I
can.
no, it's even in my bio that I was the first a
Mm,
lot, and that comes with both great responsibility and also kind of great privilege. I also very privileged to be white passing,
mm,
and quite often you don't look like one. Is a lot, and it's hard, and it yeah, there's some interesting strategies that you build. Sometimes you reflect back and you pass that off, and you shouldn't have passed that off, and that was something that you didn't do. Um, moving from post-secondary to university, I wasn't a well-off student, or I don't think many people are well off of coming out of post-secondary carrying a debt load, and so I kind of jumped into whatever position was around me at the time in the mid 90s when I started my career, or sorry, early 2000s when I started my career. There wasn't a lot of work, so you just kind of got the work. You went contract to contract, and as many people do early in their career. And I found that very unsettling. Like it was something that it took, there was not a lot of stability. Some of the contracts were 3 months or 6 months or this, and it kind of, I felt like I had to be very transient. I was moving cities for work and what have you. I felt that was something, but it also kind of gave me great joy reflecting back. I had a breadth of experiences that I don't think I would have had. I tried to use them a little bit of scaffolding to make a career out of this and that, and try to make it through. When you say leave post secondary, I kind of worked at a post secondary and never left. But I think it was something that there was quite honestly just a breadth of what happened. Um, and I was really fortunate. I have a lot of peers that weren't as fortunate, and just acknowledging them too, that the struggle's real, and but taking the time to appreciate where you are, and what got you there was something that really at the time didn't feel like I appreciated it, but now looking back, it was I learned.
mm. I like that. I think any season of life that we're in, it's so important for us to pay attention to, what is being taught, right? What can I learn from this experience, right? And I loved how you mentioned the scaffolding and how it's so important for us to, as we're learners, grabbing a hold of maybe some of the experiences, some of the tools, and pulling it together, knowing that it's going to help equip us for what's next. But that's great experience, great advice around, kind of positioning yourself as a learner, right? Life is here to teach us something, and that's going to set us up for what's next. What about you, Dr. Spencer? What barrier did you experience navigating the post-secondary to career transition? And what piece of advice would you have for us today?
I think it was the fast and furious mentality, like to go start career to change the world. So I come
Mm,
from the social work profession. You're taught about all the social ills and the advocacy you need to do, and just kind of went out blazing. And all the seasoned workers let me know, like, you know what, like pump the brakes a little bit.
mhm,
The young social, you're kind of be like, oh, who do they think they are? No, no, no. Reflecting now, they were right. And I think sometimes it's about, because now we're seeing that where maybe from my Gen X generation, it was more about you work your tenure, you maybe have 3 jobs in your whole career. No, no, it's not like that anymore. Everyone's
yeah,
about 3 years, they're gone. 3 years, you know what I'm saying? And I think one thing I could say from what I see from, years in when persons are just coming out of post-secondary is really try to connect with persons who've been there a while and ask
mm,
about their career trajectory, because there's much to be learned, even sometimes just from working, even though someone may not have climbed the hierarchy. But what do you need to know? The organizational culture, because sometimes, sorry to say it, us from the post-secondary, there is a disconnect from what we teach to what is in the workplace.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're as so polar opposites. And so these days I really try to teach about the realities of work and the importance of relationships. Your relationships. Am I still here? Oh, sorry.
Yes. Yep.
Did that happen to anyone else? Okay, sorry. I think this one. Yeah, the importance of relationships, because as you navigate your career, oftentimes it's going to be people that you knew that will have excellent resources for, you know, those hidden jobs we talk about that you never posting. Is because you knew someone, right? But if we just kind of go in blazing and don't form relationships and learn who the power players are and what we need to learn to kind of ease our ways in, right? It could hinder us in terms of, even when we do reach maybe the management level, we have not learned the people relationships kind of skills. Be friendly, find out who's there, find out as soon as you're there, how long you've been there, you know, maybe ask for a coffee chat, you know what I mean? And kind of learn the organizational culture so that you can now, if you want to change the world, you will understand the culture, then to know how to kind of navigate that. And I think that sometimes in the theoretical of things that we teach, we don't really sometimes talk about the practicality of place and organizations. And so I would just say, just be mindful of that a little bit and build those relationships as early as you can.
Yeah. And I think, you know, for the student that's sitting here today that's thinking, okay, yeah, I'll get to that when I finish, like, because, you know, it's end of March, beginning of April, things are ramping up, things are due, you know, I got to start wrapping my head around exams. I just want to say, like, building those connections, you can start that at any time. Like, and the earlier the better, as you're saying, Dr. Spencer. Start now. Build those connections with your profs as early as possible. You never know if you need to go to grad school, or, you know, you never know if you need a reference in the future. Build those relationships, those key players, get to know who they are. One of the things that I remember saying to students that would come and see me in a different role, I would say, when you get to the workplace, I said, you're there to learn. So, as you said, I know you want to change the world. I know you've learned lots and you're ready to implement, but keep your eyes open, keep your spirit open. You're there to learn and get the knowledge so that you will get the strategies. Because if you don't learn it, you won't know how to implement the strategies at the right, like, you just won't know, right? And so that's, my husband often says, you know, some things are taught and then there's some things that are caught. And you got to position yourself as a learner to catch it, right? So that's so important. Connections matter. Who you know matters. I've had people who turn around and who've reached out to me on LinkedIn or emailed me off of a connection, off of a coffee chat, and offered me a job. Like, you never know. And those people skills you could practice with your peers. Right? Like, it doesn't always have to be to, you know, the superior.
Yeah.
All right, I'm talking too much. My apologies. Jake. Jake, please share with us, what's one unique barrier you experience and what would you say to students?
Wow, yeah. Well, I was laughing as Dr. Spencer was talking, because I'm from the social work background, and there is this culture.
Right.
Even though, you know, the more seasoned people would be like, slow it down, but there's also within the culture of those sorts of places that it's overwork. You know, you always have more people on your caseload than you could ever probably really give good work to. And so there's this clash, I think, and that's, even though we're talking that there is culture, but there's always a clash in culture. So it's always like, take care of yourself, do self-care, but can you take somebody else on your caseload? And so it's just like this, you know, this thing that goes on. And I think understanding that, and I think definitely, I believe in, I like, actually made notes. I said, like, finding peers and mentors is like so important in self-care in the job, because you will find those people who will support you. You'll have those your peers that can be like, I think I'm losing my mind. And so, you know, there's those spaces in there, or like maybe there's a bit of advocacy to be done, or whatever that looks like. And so starting out when you leave, it's always good to take your peers with you, because you never know. like everybody's saying, they might get into a place and you'd be like, and they'd be like, oh, I remember you. Like, this is a really great place to work. Come, apply. And then also as your career grows, and if you stay within, I'm just thinking like within the work that I do, addictions and mental health, that kind of thing, um, you start to, let's just say, like, you start to network, and so you're in your place, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, we're at a network meeting together. I know you. We went to school together, right? And then it starts that thing of like just being able to do your work better, right? And having that
Mm-hmm.
understanding. And I think from my space, I hold great privilege, right? I mean, sitting here today, I'm white passing, I'm male, I'm middle aged, I have lots of education, I have a good life. My space of that sort of division of my privilege to non is that my trans identity, I get
Mm-hmm.
tokenized. So we briefly spoke about that before we started, but I found that to be something from an equity deserving space was really hard to navigate because a lot of employment places are like, um, they're doing hiring, and they should be doing better hiring, equitable hiring. But the problem is like Mark was saying, he was the first, right? So, once they find out, it's like now you're there. It's like, we have this policy. Could you look it over for us? Can you help us make the policy?
Right.
Can you lead the group around? And it's like all of a sudden they're asking more from you, and it's about who you are. It's like, okay, wait a minute. Which again, it does feel honoring in the beginning, but then it feels really
Mm-hmm.
taxing because it's like I'm being asked to like have a voice for like more people than I should be. And then it's like, but wait a minute, but that's okay, but it's not my job. And then, but you're still expecting me to do my job. And I found that to be really hard because there was a space that I wanted to make it better for all the other queer people. Because if they didn't already have policies and stuff, it was like, oh, I want to make it better. But then it was very taxing. So I think as you're leaving and you're going that space, I always say, the organization you're going to, maybe check to see like where are they at within their own um I'm
Yeah.
going to say equitable equitable work, and inclusion work, because if they're at the beginning, it may be very taxing for you, and it may be more than you want to take on. And you may be asked to do more, but it's also like maybe that's your building space. If you're in that sort of work, maybe it's like, oh, great, I can do my work. But I found it to be very taxing on that. So for me, it's like be mindful of where you're getting hired at. Right? Mhm. Don't just listen to the person who's hiring you because they're going to tell you how great it is, because they already have the privilege, right? So I'm saying talk to the people who go online, do the research, sort of thing.
Go beyond the job posting because the job posting always looks great.
100%. Oh, you have lots of self. I mean, we advocate.
Yeah.
We have what the employment council. I mean, oh, we have all this stuff. It's like, oh, but we didn't tell you that we're going to be like, yeah, taxing you to like your nth
Yeah.
degree, right? And which is what I go back to, setting up your boundaries 100% when you get out there. Like if the job isn't about like, well, you have to have shift work or whatever. If you have a 9 to 5, I'm just saying, if you have a 9 to 5 job, and I'm not saying we have to be like, oh, like but when you leave, you leave. Don't start
Mm.
answering emails. Don't start answering phone calls because the minute you do that, you are done because now there's an expectation, and the
Yeah, but
expectation should
Jake,
be yes.
but Jake,
Hmm.
tomorrow when I go into the office, right,
Hmm.
whether or not I'm in person or virtually, the work is there for me to do. So do I still say no? Do I still like not answer? Do I still like how do I put those boundaries in place? Because the work
Yeah,
is there for me tomorrow.
100%. So like I because I was in business, but I also do a lot of advocacy work. It's like, well, when it becomes too much, then you need to go to whoever your supervisor and be like, okay, so I have this work, and I want to get it done, but it's more than in the time allowance. So I'm asking you to help me prioritize it. Right?
Mm.
There is a way around it, folks. Right? So when you give in to the boundary of doing the extra work, then the organization never knows how much work there is, because if they keep giving you work and sending you emails and texting you and you keep answering it, they will never know that there's a limit.
Mm.
Right? And so, yes, sometimes it doesn't work. But if you go in with that limit, of like you're just not the person that's going to answer emails and you're going to do your work and come in. There's tricks. So you look at your email and you sort it. You sort it by name. Who's the important people? Who are the hierarchy that needs to be answered first? Okay, so like you probably are going to answer your supervisor first. Find all their emails. Okay, after that, you do it from there, right? And there's ways around it. But we have to learn to manage it, because if we don't, we are perpetuating self-care, but really we don't care.
Oh, that's good.
Uh-huh.
That's good. I like that. Jake, you talked about being the first, right? And so I want to hear from you. What are your top 3 or 4 skills that you've developed further because of having to navigate through systemic or individual discrimination in your career? Top 3 or 4
Mm,
skills. What would you say they are?
wow. Well, biting my tongue a lot. Um, and, okay, so yeah, I think at first I was like, I just took it all. Okay, that's great. And then I went, wait a minute, this feels kind of icky. So I think my top skills were to understand what the difference is of honoring and tokenism. Right?
Mm,
Are they honoring who I am, or are they just asking me to do their work for them? So that was my first one. I think bringing empathy. So I try to bring empathy because I believe that, for at least who I am, a lot of people have never heard. Some people don't even know what trans people are. Some people like have what they get is only what they see on TV and social media and all that. So once we give them the information, then I can hold them accountable, right? So I was doing a lot of like empathy, like, okay, like I can understand, you don't understand. So here I'm going to give you the information. Now I can hold you accountable. So it was very hard. I had to learn accountability versus anger, because at first it'd be like, well, what do you mean you don't know this stuff? Like how can you not know this, right? Um,
yeah.
and so because I had to learn how to have space. Because when I'm thinking about my learnings, as someone my age, who's a lot old, when I was in school, we learned nothing about Indigenous history. And so I had a life of like only hearing the things I heard, and I had to relearn and unlearn. And so then I look at it like, well, how can I ask that of anybody else if I have to do my own, and I have said stupid stuff and I've done stupid things? So here I am, I'm going to like ask that from someone else without at least giving them a space. So that was for me around understanding tokenism versus honoring, understanding when it was empathy versus the fight, right?
Mm,
When I could offer people empathy, or when it was like time to be like, okay, this is enough. Um, and really, it was really around again, it was really around boundaries, around like what am I willing to put up with, right? Like where are my boundaries? And if it didn't feel good, then something was wrong. If my little hairs on the back of my neck were standing up, I recognized that was my body saying, this is not right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
that's good.
Yeah.
Thank you for those.
No
Love them,
problem.
love them. The difference between honoring and tokenism is what kind of stuck with me, and I personally need to go and unpack that. So I love that. Um, Mark, what would you say your top 3 or 4 skills that you've developed further because of having to navigate through systemic or individual discrimination in your career?
Um, I immediately, when I read the question, I immediately thought of the story. An amazing man in Six Nations. His name's Pat Green, and he has a big drum, a powwow drum, and it's called Big Train. And he got the idea, and I asked him where he came up with the name. And he's like, I got the name from somebody on the reserve that had, I guess, a billboard or something on their property, and also train tracks that ran through. And so he was seeing people just drive over these train tracks really, really fast. And he wrote on the billboard, "Big Train." And he's like, and I noticed everybody slowed down. And I just love that concept of just slowing down, and
Mm,
that it will come. It's taken hundreds of years of these systems of capitalism and colonialism, anti-black racism to be built, and it will take generations for them to come. They won't change. That was something I thought early in my career, that I would change it all and it would all be better. And now, and maybe this is sorry, I don't feel like I'm, because I love this when youth come and they have this energy, but I also, because it comes at a cost, and understanding what that cost is. And I guess that's the
mm,
second part, is recognizing if you're willing to pay that cost or not. Don't let others, I think Jake used the phrase tax you, but be mindful of
Mm-hmm.
what you're willing to pay, because there is a cost of doing the work. And then finally, and to Jake's point, is empathy is such a big portion. I also want to include being forgiving of yourself. Uh, we teach a teaching and learning class for faculty who are learning to include Indigenous themes in their classes. I do say to them, so right off the bat, you're going to get it wrong, right? Because I get it wrong. And so do
Mm.
all my Indigenous colleagues, we get it wrong because, we misspoke. We had an impression that something was this way. Or somebody interpreted that we were speaking on behalf of everybody, when in fact we were speaking on behalf of nobody. But
Mm-hmm.
so be forgiving, be empathetic, and just slow down. Things will come just by your presence and your good work.
So good. That's so nourishing to my soul. I love that. Slow down. For me, that personally reinforces the importance of having a reflective practice. We get into the work that we get into, right? And oftentimes, from these communities, from our communities, we're getting into the work because it's personal. It's not just professional, but it's personal in nature. But it's really important in order for us to be effective in the work that we're doing that we have a reflective practice, that we slow down, as you're saying, take stock of what really needs to be done, when it needs to be done, how it needs to be done, what's working from what's not. And we can't do that unless we slow down. And you're right. The push of society is like, go, go, go. And so just slowing down is resisting systems in itself. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Dr. Elaine, top 3 or 4, what would you say are your skills that you've had to further develop?
Yeah, I would say that even though I've been trained in education to teach, I think that one of the skills I've learned is training and development, because what I found as someone who has experienced systemic anti-Black racism for very prolonged periods of time and having to navigate those for those who weren't coping in a way that I thought was healthy, and then having to figure out techniques of knowledge dissemination to non-racialized audiences. And it's a skill that I've really developed because I've realized that, part of the project of colonialism, white supremacy, and all of it, in my opinion, is to kill the spirit of those who are trying to advocate for change. And so when people come across the roadblocks and people experience anti-Black racism, that I can speak to that personally, often it becomes something in their body that they experience that sometimes is even debilitating to their health. And so
Mm.
second skills I've had to really kind of learn is about this mediation around trying to help people move through those feelings, and also the establishment of those who are disseminating the negative anti-Black racist practices as someone who's experienced it. By nature, I'm a problem solver. So whereas I could have kind of checked out, say, gone out of it, I've tried to be an advocate, which is one of those other skills, to how do we center this? Not just from an organizational perspective, but also for the individual that's experiencing it and they're
Mm.
in their career. Like, do we tell off everyone on day one? Or
Right.
do we learn the skill of writing? Do we learn the skill of our HR practices that we can point to and show the gaps, and being very strategic in that? And so, I mean, I've said a lot there, but it's kind of like this, because I, as a student, I had just a quick story that when I was undergrad, I remember a very profound prof I had that ironically most of the students didn't like. Most of us, the students, not me, they didn't like her because she really challenged us. She really challenged us. And I'm going 25 years ago. And one day I had decided that I was going to drop out of university because I was disillusioned. I was the student that was always putting up my hand, and profs weren't like, you know what I'm saying? I'm just like, I'm done with this. Like, I'm gonna find something else. That was in my head. And one day that prof pulled me aside and said, Elaine, I see you going all the way to
Oh.
PhD. Like, really poured into me something I didn't see at a time where I was going to leave because I was so disillusioned. I couldn't take it anymore. I say all of that to say I feel like that transferred to me now in terms of how I look at students and other people to try and see disillusionment, but you see promise, you see potential, you see that ability that no, you're going to be someone someday, but you just need some help and support. And so the advocacy skill is about the patience, even when we are confronted with debilitating structures that really deny our sense of selves. And how you get that patience is aligning with people who've been there and done that. Because a lot of times, if it's just us going through it, it's just we're all crying with each other, we're all bleeding with each other. But then someone has to rise to say, okay, this is how we're going to write. This is how we're going to do it. This is how we're going to confront it and fight back. And boy, I mean, I was even part of a group that they were able to mash up government policies that were not there before because the community came together and says, no matter what racism you guys are showing us that you said you're not going to do it, we're going to do it. And they did. And if I had more time, I would talk about that. But yeah, the calmness, the advocacy, the mediation, and how to disseminate knowledge in spaces where they're resistant to, whether it's anti-Black racism, all of it. Yeah.
That's a big one. Oh man, like that's a big one. And the as you said, it's a skill that's learned over time, trial and error. Oh, that didn't work. Right? Okay, super quick. What's one key or tip or hack to maintaining mental well-being during career transitions, whether it be post-secondary to workplace or maybe career to career change? Like, what would you say is one hack, one tip, one trick? Dr. Elaine, you can start.
One hack, one trick. I mean, I don't know if this is a tat or a trick, but I just really strongly feel everyone, let's not define our sense of worth by our careers. Because the moment that goes sideways, you will too. Because it's just all wrapped up in our jobs. You know what I mean? Like, there's more to us as human beings than that. We're friends, we're partners, we're this, we're that. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's so important for me. I ground all of this by faith, right? And that means different things. But when I connect to my faith and I get rejuvenated, I know I can go the next mile. And so you have to find that place that is going to give you that drive to know beyond myself. There's a metaphysical realm out there that I know I'm going to make it. I'm going to get through. And so for those who ascribe to that, that is a little tip that maybe tap into that so that in the times of, depletion, which we all get, because that's life, right? Life is not just, it's hills, man. It's valleys. And in those lower times, like what we experienced in the last few years, in isolation and lockdowns, you have to lean on. And I'm not trying to be cliche, like lean on me, you know what I mean? But seriously, we need
to
connect us outside to keep us going. So that's my little, what did you call it? Tick or trick or whatever.
Yeah, the hack, the tip, the trick, the key, the whatever you want to call it, the goods.
Yeah.
Jake, what goods do you have for students today in their transition to wherever?
So for me, listen more and talk less. For me, because I wanted to like tell everybody like what I've seen everything I can, and really what it was is I really needed to listen and talk less.
Good. I appreciate that. I'm learning that.
Jake, I need that. Yeah.
Oh, it's tough. I'm not going to tell you. It is like, it's like, especially when you're new, you're trying to prove yourself. It's like, but the biggest thing is like listen, hear what people are saying, be guided a little bit, and try to just talk less, listen more.
Yeah, that's how you learn to be effective. So thank you for saying that. Right? Yeah. Like I love that. Mark, how about you? What's one tip, trick, hack? Do you say to help students?
Yeah, I would say that your career path should be defined by you, not your employer. That your employer owns your job, you own your career. And so that if you have the ability and things aren't working out to make choices in that sense, not expect your employer to be to change, because they won't, or they won't change in the manner in which you need them to be really, really do that. That statement comes with an incredible amount of privilege and an incredible amount of things. But I just, if you have the option to change for the better, make the change. If you have the ability to advocate for better, do that. Don't expect your employer to read your mind or be able to make the changes that you need. Those are sometimes really, really hard to do. And yeah, keep fighting the good fight. I don't know. That was a depressing one, but I just like I really think you need to take control sometimes of your own way and
Yeah.
not be defined by as Dr. Spencer said, defined by your paycheck or by your title.
Yeah, I appreciate that so much. Something that we didn't talk about that we probably don't have time to talk about, but is parental expectations, right? Because I mean, there's the expectations from our bosses that want to kind of map out what work will look like and should be like, and you're saying this is up to you, right? Like you navigate it, you push forward. But then I often think about, again, from our communities, our parents and the voice of our parents weigh really, really heavy in terms of determining what's good for us. And I know I'm out of time, but can we take, like, does anyone have one thing just to say around the parental for someone who's maybe saying, I want to do this, but my parents are really pushing me towards that? Is there one piece of advice that anyone can give?
I think it's difficult, but I think what Mark said, it's your life. Um, your parents may want something. Now I recognize it's always difficult, but it's like there's a space in there that's like, but you have to do it for you because otherwise you'll never be happy.
Yeah.
My mom had this dream, and so first off, I shattered her dream when I took music and then Native studies. I think she had a dream originally that I was going to be a priest. And then I took music and Native studies, which shattered that dream. And then and then after that, she was probably just happy that I was employed. But it just was really one of those things. And quite honestly, I found happiness, and it took me a long, long time to get there. And I didn't even have that coming out of post secondary. It took me a long time to find that and to find my way. And I'll be quite frank, and my mom has since passed, but I think that no matter your parents or your chosen family or your family, they will always, if they truly are your family or your chosen family, they will always love you. And again, it's not defining by what you do, but it's about who you are.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate all of the knowledge that's been shared today, all the knowledge that's been, constructed together. Really appreciate you all, and I've learned so much. Thank you, everyone, for even having me to facilitate this panel. And at this time, I'm going to pass things on to Maria. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Maria, you're muted.
Yeah.
Thank you for letting me know. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're not done yet. Before we move on to the Q&A, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Monique for moderating the panel. The Seneca Humber Committee and our participants are grateful for sharing your time, your knowledge, and just creating a very warm, supportive environment during the panel discussion. Thank you so much for all our panelists for sharing their insights, their experiences, and of course, your humor. Thank you so much for your honesty. Thank you for that. I can relate to Mark when Mark wishes tomorrow will be a better day instead of accessing valuable available resources. Jake, I have learned to say no, but with some guilt. Dr. Elaine, context and culture. That's something that I have to unpack. And for thank you. There were so many points raised that we need to reflect on and definitely help us with maintaining our well-being while we go through these changes. So for our question and answer portion, if you have any question, you can click on the reactions button, press raise your hand to get our attention. If you would like to turn on your camera while you ask your questions, feel free to do so. But otherwise, feel free to leave your message or your questions in the chat and we will attend to them. Any brave souls out there who would like to ask their question?
Monica, you asked us, but what are your 3 tips for making the transition?
I think it overlaps with a lot of yours. I'm trying to think of what's worked well for me. I think grounding myself in who I am outside of the job, the career, the title, the position. I think, we started there in the conversation. And I would say that would be one is grounding myself. How I do that, like Dr. Elaine, is grounding myself in my faith. Who am I without the hats that I wear, right? Who am I? So that's one. I think so making sure that students are grounding themselves. I would say close your eyes and what do you see for yourself? What are you doing? Where are you? And write that out. Write what the vision is. Describe it. If you want to paint it out, draw it out, do that so that when the noise of life comes, right, you can move towards that vision. Write it out, draw it out, what have you, and revisit it because again, life gets busy and the demands don't stop. And so even for myself, I have to go back to what I know to be true, which is the vision, because it came from inside, it came from within, right? So that's the second thing. And the third thing is, so even if you get caught up, which oftentimes it does, you get caught up in doing, whether or not you're doing a lot at school or you're doing a lot at your job. When you get caught up with the doing, make sure you're capturing everything that you're doing. So capture it on your resume. If you're staying late and you're working on an additional project that's not even a part of your job description, capture it because one day you will transition and you want to be able to capture all the extra stuff that you were busy doing. So I think that's what I would, those are my top 3 that I would share with folks. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. While we're waiting for our questions from our group, I have a question here. Anybody can answer this question. Do you consider yourself a change maker or change advocate or both, and why? Yeah, that's a tough question. Yeah.
That's a tough one. I think change maker and advocator, they're so like, well, we can define words, but when you're advocating, I think what you're doing is you're starting the process of showing people maybe what the gaps are. Maybe a pathway. Whereas a change maker is someone or a group of people that are showing the pathway to make the change, and then maybe saying advocating to make those changes. How can we do it? Stopping and talking about when people keep going, well, there's this barrier. Well, there's this barrier. It's like, well, then we're going to shift you around that and we're going to keep it going down this pathway, but we have to get around those barriers or through them, whichever. So I think there can be a difference, but I think people we'll see them as they are, but that's the way I see it. If I'm advocating for something, I'm advocating for someone to think about making a change, and the change maker is either helping them or pointing them in the direction with some good information on how to make the change.
Okay, that's good. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Another question here is, what attributes were helpful when you were facing challenges in choosing and navigating your career? So I can put that in the chat here. What attributes were helpful when you were facing challenges in choosing and navigating your career?
I would say perseverance.
Perseverance, yes.
Perseverance was definitely one. I remember points of my career seeing a job I wasn't qualified for, but like with the razor lens, I kept my eye on it. And I was just like, you're going to be mine. You're going to be mine. And just kind of pursuing and persevering, trying to find out how do I until the day came, and it absolutely happens. So I think perseverance, because perseverance helps to push through discouragement, right? Because sometimes
Mhm.
when you leave school and you're applying for all these jobs, you're getting a lot of no's, right? And don't let that discourage you, because the yes is coming, and it's that perseverance to know I have the skills, I know I can do it, right? So just keep it moving, because most have experienced that, right? Most have experienced some type of discouragement in the career, and so forth, but it will get better. But you got to stay in that, line to say, yeah, one day it's going to be mine. So just be, that perseverance in you to know that, your schooling is not in vain, and it's going to happen, and just keep it positive. Yeah.
Yes,
I'm
thank
sure
you.
my fellow peers, do you remember early, like maybe even as a teenager, maybe getting fired from that call center job where I had to call people and people slamming the phone, not meeting quotas and stuff like that. That was the job back in the day, outbound, when call centers just became what it is now, right? I hated those jobs, but yeah, kept it going. Yeah, so it will get
Thank
better.
you. I remember when I was there was this dream job that I wanted, and they said no. And I'm thinking maybe I should change my strategy. Maybe I
Right.
should go in and do cold calling. That worked. So yes, perseverance, that's very important. We have a question here from Harsh: how to build confidence and experience when feeling self-doubt and stress.
So I'm just going to speak from a little bit of a mental health space of it. You know what, we all experience that, and if you're not, then I would be questioning, right? I mean, we have to experience that's our anxiety, and anxiety is good because it tells us what's going on for us, like what's not good. Like the reason we don't all jump off roofs is because our anxiety comes in and goes, okay, that's going to be bad, right? So I think I mean, if you're you have self-doubt. So first of all, I think there's no one that doesn't have self-doubt and stress. If it's becoming crippling for you, that you're not moving forward, right? Then one, I would say, maybe find some support that can help you move through some of those things through maybe from a mental health lens, right? Because sometimes they're just some internal things. And again, maybe take that step back and relax and be like, okay, what is making me why am I self-doubting, right? And then, well, is there another truth to that, right? So, if I'm saying I don't think I can do that job, well, what is that truth to that, right? And then the stress is to be, what is that stress about? And again, it's about really sitting with it and kind of being like, okay, I'm feeling stressed. Why am I feeling stressed? Well, I'm feeling stressed because I'm overwhelmed. Okay, why am I overwhelmed, right? And just break it down until you can get down to figuring out what it is that's sitting there, right? And and then for everybody, it's going to be a little bit different. But if it is a thing that's not allowing you to get where you want to go, then I really say find a counselor and get someone to help you through that.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank you
well
very
said,
much.
Jake. I just like to add something that gets me through is practicing, and and I practice a lot, especially with tough conversations that I've had as a leader, but also practicing before job interviews, spending some time. Spending some time with frequently asked questions in job interview in a Google search, and prepping for those. I find if I've exercised that muscle a little bit, I'm much more apt to fall on it, and whether it be the same question or a different question, I have a bit of a better way. I think Jake makes an outstanding point that if you're able to burn off the stress and the anxiety, that's great. If you find that that is a part of something that is becoming a part of your identity and your physicality, then you definitely need to talk to somebody. As students, there's wonderful resources, but use them now. Get those hints and tips and use them. But practice was something I always thought I could do it off the cuff, and I never realized it was never as good as I was after doing it 4 or 5 times. Yeah.
Thank you. Um, for uh, for this question that was sent directly, where did you intend to take your career when you were in school, and what surprises did you have in your career journey?
Well, no one ever grows up and says, "I want to be the senior advisor on reconciliation and inclusion." That's never something that it wasn't. There wasn't a Halloween costume for that when I was growing up. So um, I find it. I don't know where my career took me. And quite honestly, I just most recently, less than 12 months ago, my career shifted and I was appointed into a position that I didn't apply for, but through the trust of the senior leadership, I became my current title. I think I'm at a privileged state of my career, being able to say I'd like to define where I go and where I move. But very early days of my career was I need this job because I need to pay rent and I need to feed and you know this is happening in my life and that is happening in my life. I need the fiscal stability. That was at a place where I needed to do that. So I think you make sometimes your career choices based upon the realities that you're experiencing. And I don't think you should feel bad about that. I think you should feel very proud that you were able to make a choice. And so, and there were some opportunities that came up in my career that would pay me less, have me move to different cities, move away from my family, and what I said no to them. And I think I kind of centered myself in a lot of my career choices. And so centering myself was something um, that helped me define what that step was for me.
We have a question from Lucas. Thank you, Mark. Do you guys have any tips on how to manage burnout when it starts affecting your school or your work?
I would say that look at areas of your life that you can drop temporarily and replace it with things that is fun. And that could just be a temporary thing just to kind of banter off the burnout, because burnout means that I need to be rejuvenated. I need to be poured back into. I need to feel good about what I'm doing, you know what I mean? And not fatigued and tired. And sometimes doing things that are fun. And that means different things to different people, right? To Lucas, because I think the management of the burnout is around overwork. So, but we know it's situational. Like March, April is a very stressful time for students. All the assignments, exams are coming, even for the profs, right? All the grading we have to do, and stuff like that, right? What is there anything temporary you can drop? And that could be replaced with something that's fun. And then you kind of get back into that routine again. And just know that, again, a lot of times it's situational, it's not forever. To Jake's point that he made before, if it is prolonged, like something that you cannot get out of, you know what I mean? Like it's just prolonged. The burnout is just on week. This is where you need extra supports. And I know Seneca for students, just like other institutions, do have resources where students can tap into to get those type of supports in those times. And so if it's prolonged, just can't get out of, that's when you kind of know, all right, I need to engage with, campus resources and so forth, or family resource or what have you, right? But if it's kind of like, the seasonal, don't forget to do things, back to my original point, that's going to bring you some joy. That's what I would say to that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to our moderator and panelists. Thank you for this wonderful session. And I can sit here and listen to you all day but we only have so much time. And thank you for carving out some time for us. And I bring you now, Katie Ann, for our closing remarks.
Wow, what an incredible session we had today. Thank you all so much for joining us today. First off, I want to send a big shout out to our panelists and moderators for providing us with such insightful and practical tips and tools to help us along our journeys. A big shout out again to our planning committee, Beatrice from Seneca, and also Maria and myself from Umber. Phil Gilgate, our manager, he was not able to be here, but notwithstanding that, he has sent his blessings, and we're really grateful that he gave us the go ahead and help us with the planning of this session. Before you click that exit button, we need your help. We want to do better, and we need to hear from you in order to improve our next Career Month event. So I would love for you to go to our website and click on the URL and provide us with your feedback. You will be entered to a chance to win $50 gift card and also $300. That can go a far way as students. So we want to thank you for joining us today again. Amazing session. We have learned so much, and I'm sure we will all take all that we have learned and apply it to our life as we transitions, whether through post-sec or in our careers. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you for having us.